Halt. Rest. Attention battery. Raid. Rest. We come here today as New Yorkers, Excelsior men, Rochesterians, red legs all, to remember the men whom we humbly aspire to represent. Here is where we stood, battered, bruised, bloodied, without our captain, but fortunately supported by Major John A. Reynolds, a fine example of a great leader. When Major Reynolds, not currently assigned to a post in the Artillery Reserve, found that he could rejoin and rally his battery, he came here. He did not take command, but left it in the capable hands of Lieutenant Breck. At the dedication of our previous monument, then Major Breck, with the assistance of Lieutenant Sheldon, would offer the following of our battery's actions. After passing through the village of Gettysburg, the enemy was checked and the national forces sieged and held a position of great importance on the cemetery ridge. At dusk, the batteries outside the cemetery gate were reposted. Battery B, 4th U.S., with 4 guns across the Baltimore Road facing the village. Next, it 4 guns of Battery I, 1st New York, Captain Weidrich's battery. Next, Cooper's 4-gun battery. And then on the extreme right of his line, Reynolds Battery with 5 guns. This turn or refusal of the line of batteries thus mounted 13 3-inch guns and 4 Napoleons, and breastworks of the horseshoe form were at once constructed before the pieces. The 5th Maine is described as posting to the right and some 50 yards in front of this line on a small knoll, whence it commanded a flanking fire at close range upon any column attacking this position. During the morning, several moving columns of the enemy were shelled at intervals, but no engagement occurred until 4 p.m., when they planted a battery of 4 20-pounders and 6 10-pound Parrots in a wheat field in our immediate front at about 1,300 yards, and opened the most accurate fire I have yet to see from an artillery battery. This engagement lasted for an hour and a half, when the enemy retired, hauling 2 of their guns off by hand. A portion of their guns remained, a brief fire from a new position a little to the right, but they were soon silenced. After this engagement, Cooper's battery was relieved by Ricketts' battery, giving the line 2 additional guns. At about dusk on the 2nd day, where there was a general attack on our position from the direction of the village by General Hayes' Louisiana Tiger Brigade and Hoke's North Carolina Brigade. To quote again Colonel Wainwright's report, as our columns filled out of the town, they came under the fire of the 5th Maine Battery at about 800 yards. Wheeling into line, they swung around, the right resting on the town and pushing up the hill, which is quite a steep hill at this point. Opened up on them, at first with shrapnel and afterwards with canister, making a total of 15 guns in their front and 6 on their left flank. Their center and left never mounted a hill at all, but their right worked its way up under the cover of the houses and pushed completely through Weidrich's battery into Ricketts. The cannoneers of both these batteries stood fast to their guns, driving the enemy off the fence rails and stones and capturing a few prisoners. I believe it may be claimed that this attack was the most entirely propelled by artillery. My surgeon, who was in town and dressed many of their wounded, tells me that they reported their loss in the engagement as very great. On the 3rd day, the battery was not engaged, and from its position could take no part in the heavy cannonade which preceded the great Pickett's charge. From our sheltered position, we could see gray figures moving among the guns and what now there are monuments along the cemetery crest, and listen to an awful chorus of batteries that ushered in the last acts on this great field. Major Breck is quoted as saying, "In this terrible conflict, Battery L was an active participant for the first to the close of the third day's fighting. From Lieutenant Breck's after-action report, he states the following. I sustained in the 3 days engagement the following losses. 1 man killed, a private, 16 wounded, including Captain Reynolds and 2 non-commissioned officers. 1 of the wounded men has since died. I had 22 horses killed and disabled. 2 horses were wounded by fragments of shells from a battery of 20-pound Parrots in the cemetery to my rear, which seemed too often to explode prematurely. The amount of ammunition expended during these 3 days' battles was 1,290 rounds, consisted of Shekel percussion, 523 rounds, Shekel compound, 715 rounds, and canister, 52 rounds. 2 chests of ammunition, 100 rounds, were issued to Captain Weidrich's battery by order of Colonel Wainwright. The officers and men, with much bravery, coolness, and collectedness, acted on this location. Though greatly fatigued and exhausted by almost constant labor and watchfulness for 3 days, the men performed their duties cheerfully and quite enthusiastically. I would mention in a particular manner Bugler R. Maston Smith, who, when one of the cannoneers was wounded, dismounted from his horse and bravely filled the part of the wounded man. I remain respectfully your obedient servant, George Breck, 1st Lieutenant Commander, Battery L, 1st New York Light Artillery. Attention, battery! Sir, you would post the priest, sir. Battery, draw, saber. Attention to roll. The following are the names, those wounded, killed, and detail of injury in our battery at this engagement over the 3 days. Drummer, commence. Gilbert Reynolds, Captain, wounded left eye. Charles A. Rooney, Sergeant, lightly wounded and missing in action. George Blake, Corporal, wounded in his left side. John P. Cunn, Corporal, fatally wounded, died July 7th. Edward Castillo, killed in action day 1. William Krogel, wounded in his right shoulder. Michael Elringer, wounded in the head. Edward Forrester, wounded in the left foot. George Gavitt, wounded in the face and left, also missing in action. Amos Gibbs, wounded in the left wrist. Patrick Gray, wounded in the back by a piece of fence rail. Victor Bretter, wounded in his left. George Morris, wounded sighted on his side. John Valor, wounded in the right foot. And William Wood, wounded in his ankle. also ask at this time that we would recognize the following modern losses to our battery, our branch of service, and our hobby we love so dear. Those who are not able to be with us here today in body, but most certainly are here with us in spirit. David Sir, Corporal, 1st New York Light Artillery. Mark Hadley, Private, 1st New York Light Artillery. Larry Fisher, Colonel, Federal Artillery Reserve. Arthur Stone, 13th New Jersey Volunteer Infantry Company K. Dick Roche, Colonel, 155th New York Volunteer Infantry. James E. Doyle, Lieutenant, 155th New York Volunteer Infantry. Frank June Ruiz, Lieutenant 14th Brooklyn and Lieutenant Colonel of the Union Volunteers. Battery, present arms. Bugler, sound to the fallen. Arms! Battery, return! Sabers! Parade, rest! Forgive me, but my indulgence. If I may thank Sergeant Chapman for the opportunity to honor our battery, those of then and now here today. I also would request thanks to the officers for having faith in him who appointed me and serve over our beloved battery to allow him to give me this personal honor. This monument might not be our first day monument, but many might think that not a lot happened here. But it is here that holds a special meaning to me. A few of us got to sit here this summer at night and stayed with the boys for quite some time. I was able to take possibly one of the great pictures that I have from my reenacting career here with my da. And here, what I've only recently found out, that this monument was designed by our very own Lieutenant Shelton. We also lost a limber here to enemy fire. You would indulge me again, I think that these few words are fitting to close. It's a shame the Chamberlain's not here because this is his namesake. Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain said, "In great deeds, something abides. On great fields, something stays. Forms change and bodies pass, bodies disappear, but spirits linger. To consecrate ground for the envisioned place of the souls. Generations that know us not and that we know not of, heart drawn to see where and by whom great things were suffered and done by them, shall come to this deathless field to ponder and to dream. And lo, the shadow of a mighty presence shall wrap them in its bosom, and the power of the vision passes into their souls." Attention, battery. For the good of the order.
No.
Okay. For the good of the Excelsior State. 3 cheers for the 1st New York Light Artillery and Wheeler's Battery. Hip hip.
Hurrah!
Hip hip.
Hurrah!
Hip hip.
Hurrah!
And a tiger.
Arr!
Thank you, sir.